Welcome back to Epic History. Today, we're diving into the top 5 bloodiest battles in history. Get ready for an intense look at some of the most brutal confrontations ever fought. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more historical content. When we talk about the wars of the 20th century, it's easy to get bogged down in statistics. Millions dead here, tens of millions there. The numbers lose their impact, but sometimes you need to look at a single battle, a single city, to grasp the true horror of what those numbers mean. And when it comes to World War II, no place better exemplifies this than Stalingrad. From August of 42 to February of 43, this city on the Volga River became a vortex of violence, sucking in two of the most powerful military machines the world had ever seen. On one side, the Nazis, driven by Hitler's delusional belief in a thousand-year Reich. On the other, the Soviets, defending their homeland with the grim determination born of unimaginable suffering. What unfolded in the streets and buildings of Stalingrad wasn't just a battle. It was a struggle for survival, a descent into a primordial pit of savagery. Imagine, if you will, a cityscape transformed into a labyrinth of rubble and ruin, buildings reduced to skeletal husks, the air thick with smoke and the stench of death. Every inch of ground was contested with a ferocity that defied reason. Hand-to-hand combat raged in the sewers, in factories, even within the shells of bombed-out buildings. Snipers preyed on anything that moved, and artillery rained down with terrifying indifference. The human cost is almost beyond comprehension. We're talking about estimates that range upwards of 2 million casualties. 2 million souls, soldiers and civilians alike, swallowed whole by the maelstrom. The Volga, they say, ran red with blood. Stalingrad wasn't just a military defeat for the Germans, it was a psychological blow from which they never truly recovered. The American Civil War, a conflict so steeped in tragedy and so fundamentally rooted in the soul of a nation that even today its echoes resonate through time. And within that war, few events stand out with the stark, terrible clarity of the Battle of Gettysburg. Imagine, if you will, the summer of 1863, the United States, a nation cleaved in two, locked in a death struggle over the very ideals upon which it was founded. The Confederacy, led by the tactically brilliant but ultimately doomed Robert E. Lee, makes a desperate gamble, an invasion of the North that culminates in a small town in Pennsylvania, Gettysburg. For 3 days, from July 1st to July 3rd, the fate of a nation hung in the balance. The fields and hills around that small town became a crucible, a furnace where the fires of war consumed over 50,000 souls. Picture the Union lines, blue-clad soldiers bracing themselves against the onslaught, the Confederates, clad in grey, charging across open ground, the air thick with the shriek of bullets, the roar of cannon fire, names etched into the collective memory of a nation. Little Round Top, Devil's Den, Pickett's Charge, each one a microcosm of the larger tragedy, each one a testament to the courage and the folly of man. Gettysburg wasn't just about military objectives, it was about brothers fighting brothers, about the disintegration of shared history, the shattering of dreams. The casualties, over 50,000 in just 3 days, defy easy comprehension. Gettysburg marked a turning point in the war, a turning point for the Union, a turning point for the Confederacy, and ultimately a turning point for a nation wrestling with its demons. The Western Front of World War I, a scarred and broken landscape, a labyrinth of trenches stretching for hundreds of miles, a testament to the folly of a conflict that seemed to have no end. And within that nightmare there exists a name that chills the soul, a name synonymous with suffering and sacrifice on an almost unimaginable scale: Verdun. From February to December of 1916, this fortress city in northeastern France became a focal point. A grinding, attritional struggle that came to embody the very essence of the Great War's horror. Imagine, if you will, a battlefield dominated by artillery, the constant thunder of the guns, the earth itself trembling under the weight of exploding shells. Men huddled in trenches, living in mud and filth, haunted by the ever-present spectre of death. The German strategy was brutally simple: bleed the French white. To inflict so many casualties, to expend so much ammunition that the French will to resist would crumble. The French, for their part, clung to Verdun with a tenacity born of desperation. "They shall not pass" became more than just a slogan. It became a mantra, a prayer whispered amidst the ruins. Life in the trenches was a special kind of hell. Rats, disease, the ever-present stench of decay, and always the shelling. The bombardments were so intense that the very landscape was transformed. Forests were blasted into splinters, the ground churned into a moonscape of craters, and the casualties, those numbers that defy comprehension, that numb the mind with their sheer scale. Estimates vary, but we're talking about 750,000 men, German and French, killed or wounded. Verdun became a symbol, a monument to the futility of war, to the hubris of generals who seemed content to throw wave after wave of men into the meat grinder. It was a battle fought not for territory, but for inches, for yards, for the illusion of progress in a conflict that seemed to have no end. The year is 1916, the world is engulfed in the flames of the Great War, and the Western Front has become a byword for stalemate, for a brutal, attritional struggle measured in yards and inches, paid for in blood. And it is against this backdrop that we find ourselves on the banks of the Somme River, bracing ourselves for a battle that will forever scar the soul of a nation. The Battle of the Somme. The very name conjures up images of mud, of blood, of young men cut down in their prime by an enemy they can barely see. It was a battle born of desperation, a desperate attempt by the British and French to break the deadlock on the Western Front, to bleed the German army white, just as the Germans had tried to do at Verdun. Imagine, if you will, the morning of July 1st, 1916. The British guns, silent for days, suddenly erupt in a deafening roar, a creeping barrage, they called it, designed to clear a path for the infantry. But the Germans, hunkered down in their deep dugouts, had weathered the storm, and when the British soldiers went over the top, they walked straight into a storm of steel. The casualties on that first day were catastrophic. Over 57,000 British soldiers killed, wounded, or missing. The bloodiest day in the history of the British Army. Entire battalions were wiped out, their ranks filled with men barely old enough to shave, and yet the battle raged on. For 4 long months, the British and French hurled themselves against the German lines. New technologies like the tank made their debut, but the fundamental nature of the fighting remained unchanged. A brutal, attritional slog, a war of attrition in its most horrific form. The Somme became a byword for the futility of war, for the callous disregard for human life that seemed to characterize the conflict. By the time the guns finally fell silent in November, over 1 million men had become casualties. The Somme, for all its strategic insignificance, became a symbol of the Great War's terrible toll. June 18th, 1815, a date etched into the annals of history, a date synonymous with the fall of empires, the end of an era, and the final dramatic act in the career of one of history's most iconic figures, Napoleon Bonaparte, the Battle of Waterloo. Even the name crackles with a kind of dark energy, conjuring up images of clashing armies, the thunder of cannon fire, and the fate of nations hanging in the balance. It was the culmination of decades of conflict, the final showdown between Napoleon's France and a coalition of European powers determined to see him vanquished. Imagine, if you will, the rolling fields of Belgium transformed into a battleground. The French army, battle-hardened veterans led by a man who had once seemed invincible, arrayed against the combined might of the British, Dutch, Belgian and German forces under the Duke of Wellington. The air crackles with tension, the silence before the storm broken only by the distant rumble of drums and the clatter of hooves. And then the first shots ring out and all hell breaks loose. Waterloo was a battle fought at close quarters, a brutal, no-holds-barred slugfest. Musket fire ripped through the ranks, cannonballs tore through flesh and bone, and cavalry charges crashed into enemy lines with bone-jarring force. Napoleon, his genius for tactics perhaps dimmed by years of campaigning, made a series of critical errors. The Prussians, arriving on the battlefield late in the day, sealed his fate. The French army, once the terror of Europe, crumbled, the dream of empire shattered on the fields of Waterloo. The casualties were staggering. Tens of thousands lay dead or dying, the ground littered with the mangled bodies of men and horses. The air, thick with the stench of gunpowder and blood, echoed with the groans of the wounded. Waterloo marked the end of an era. Napoleon, defeated and exiled, would never again threaten the peace of Europe. Thanks for watching our countdown of the top 5 bloodiest battles in history. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, and subscribe for more content like this. See you next time on Epic History.